All right, we got something really special coming up. After these great talks that we've had so far, we come to our very first fireside chat. When we talk about ecosystems in Web3, you might think of ecosystems like layer ones in the Ethereum ecosystem, maybe layer twos like the Polygon ecosystem. But arguably, our guest is the CEO of North American operations for this ecosystem. And I would argue that they're maybe one of the biggest in the space. And he is with Animoca Brands. And the moderator of this one is none other than Erhan. Please put your hands together for Robby Yung of Animoca Brands.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Very happy to have Robby Yung with us, the CEO of Animoca Brands. I'm honored that you've come here to the Algarve and given us your time, so welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Okay, Robby. So, I mean, where do we start? I mean, Animoca is, a major player in Web3 and is a pioneer in a lot of respects in gaming and metaverse. And, you caught the front, you front run that, in a lot of way. And obviously, Animoca's grown massively since then. But before we just dive into that really interesting stuff, why don't you just tell our audience a little bit, if they're not 100% sure about Animoca, they haven't heard of them, like, who is Animoca and like, what is your vision?
Sure. So Animoca Brands, we are fundamentally a game company, so we make games. And we have kind of two parts of the business. On the one hand, we make games from studios around the world. We have 13 studios, all kinds of games, whether it's console games, casual mobile games, PC games, etc. And then the other side of the house is our investing activity, which we're often better known for. So since we pivoted from making traditional games to focusing just on blockchain games back in 2017, we began investing in the space as well. And so we've actually become one of the more active investors in the space now, and we have a portfolio of about 450 companies across Web3. And this is in all different kinds of disciplines within Web3. So broadly speaking, roughly half the portfolio is in infrastructure, and then the other half is in, Web3 culture, which is appropriate for today.
Yeah.
And that includes everything from gaming to fashion and art and music, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Robby. So, I mean, let's start there. Like, obviously you guys are massive investors in gamers. You've got like Web2 gaming backgrounds, and now you're in Web3 gaming. A lot of the promise of the games, I would say that they're not quite there yet. We're still waiting for those AAA titles, but I understand that they take years to build. Mm-hmm. How far away do you think we are until your average person is playing a Web3 game?
I think we're not actually as far as you'd think. I think the question is what we mean by a Web3 game, because often I think a lot of us think about really famous games, being those AAA console-style games, your Grand Theft Autos and Fortnite and etc. And these games are obviously fantastic and very well known, but that's one particular segment of the game industry. And so that would be like thinking about, summer blockbuster action movies, but ignoring television or Netflix or anything else that happens in video entertainment. So actually, when you think about what are the most popular games historically have been casual mobile games. The advent of the smartphone doubled the game industry in size in a matter of 5 years, probably. And so I think we have to think of games across a spectrum. And I think what you'll see these days is that there's actually a lot of great games in Web3, both on browser, but also on mobile. And I think we're going to see a lot more on multiple different kinds of platforms. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of AAA content in the near term. I mean, we actually, plug, we have a couple of titles of our own. So if you've heard of Life Beyond or Phantom Galaxies, these are AAA titles. But the reason that we're able to put out AAA blockchain titles is because we actually started developing them before blockchain. So they've been in development already for 3-4 years. And it takes that long to make a AAA title, which is why once the wave sort of peaked in 2021 and lots of investment went into the space, you expect those investments to produce titles in 2025, which is why we haven't seen them yet. So in the meantime, I think you're going to see much more content coming out on the casual sector.
Okay. Now, obviously, a lot of different blockchains have positioned themselves as, the blockchain for gaming. I know Solana has a lot of games on them. What is Animoca's position in terms of various different chains that are, supposedly built for gaming? Like, do you have one or two that you prefer that your projects that you invest in build upon?
I think in terms of individual blockchains or scaling solutions, it tends to be, it's not all about technology, which is a difficult conversation I have with my CTO, because often it's not the best technology that wins either. It's a combination of technology and community and, you know, dare I say, liquidity, which is very important in Web3. And so you have to keep all these things in mind. And so I always urge our portfolio companies to think about these blockchain environments as being communities. So the question is the content I'm making appropriate for the Solana community or the Tezos community or the Polygon community? Because think of it like a community, and if the answer to that is yes, then maybe you have, you know, a ripe audience waiting for something like what you're building.
Okay. So something that I'm really fond of Animoca Brands about is that you're always pushing the open metaverse. And I know that might not make sense to everyone, so it would be great if you could explain what is the open metaverse and why is it so important that the metaverse is open?
Sure. So I think the big promise of what we have with Web3 and with blockchain is this idea that we can have true digital ownership. So we can actually own our digital stuff. And this is a massive inflection point in how software is created, because essentially what we're doing is we're taking down the walls between software applications. Historically, software has always been siloed. And so if you want to play, like, use games as an example. If you want to play Fortnite or you want to play Minecraft, you do that, but the assets all stay within their own games. They don't cross back and forth between games. Everything needs the developer's permission to leave. Now that we have true digital ownership with blockchain and we create our content as NFTs, those are open and freely composable assets. So you can take those assets out of the game and do what you like with them. You can put them in a marketplace and trade them with other players. You can bring it to another game that might support that asset. And I think the thing that's really important about that for gamers is it gets to the heart of gameplay itself. I think in the early days of blockchain gaming, there was a lot of resistance from traditional gamers to this idea of trading of in-game assets, because they felt like, well, this is just monetization. It's not about fun, right? We want to play games because we want to have fun, and there's too much focus on selling stuff to make money. But actually, if you can show that you can take your in-game assets from one game to another and, you know, have your custom-made race car that you've been spending all your time modifying and kitting out and race it not just in this game, but that game and the third game, that's actually a completely different experience than any game that's happened before. And it's only possible with blockchain. So this interoperability between games is really, really important, but it extends to the wider Web3 community. It extends to the fact that I can welcome on board PFP projects to come into my game, because if you have a Punk or a Bored Ape or a Cool Cat or something, then I can treat you a certain way as a VIP customer in my game, or give you a specially wrapped car in my racing game. So this opens up all new ways to engage with other audiences because of interoperability. But the only way that we'll get interoperability is continuing to agree to keep our standards open. And that way we can all benefit from sharing content with each other.
Yeah, I think it's so, so important. It's a big battle that you're probably already having, and it's going to come up and get even more of a big battle with the kind of centralized platforms like Meta and all those guys. Yes. But yeah, I mean, we're all behind Animoca Brands, of course. So, so look, obviously we're still somewhat in a bear market, let's say. I think we are. Everyone wants to know, you know, what is going to be the next craze. You know, people want to invest. You know, people obviously, you know, want to make profits, but also people want to, you know, be part of projects that are going to be on the next frontier. So obviously, with your position as CEO of Animoca Brands, obviously you must have an amazing 360 view of what's you know, bubbling out there and what you think is going to pop in the next bull run. So like, I'd love to ask you that question.
So I think the best way to look at it is to think about, again, communities, because one of the things that we've observed over the last 5 or 6 years is that it's, you know, Web3 is incredible, and the Web3 tools are amazing at helping to build and reinforce community and community relationships. And that's really codified through ownership. And if we think about some of the things that have emerged this year, In the world of NFTs, one of the things that's really emerged has been ordinals on
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And ordinals have gone nuts. You know, if you haven't heard of ordinals, you've been living under a rock in the Web3 community for this last quarter. But the reason that ordinals have gone nuts is because they found an audience. All the people who were holding Bitcoin didn't have a chance to play in culture. They didn't have a chance to play in NFTs because they wanted to hold on to their Bitcoin. And now, ordinals gives people who hold Bitcoin a way to enjoy the benefits of culture and non-fungible token content, but in a Bitcoin environment. So all that happened here was the marrying of an untapped audience with all the benefits that we as a community in Web3 have been building around the culture side of Web3. And so I think if you look going forward, the question is, how do you then continue to tap into new communities and give them, you know, the benefit of some of the wonderful things that we've been building in Web3?
So what you know, can you give us some examples of what
Sure.
those untapped communities could be?
So I think we spend a lot of time looking at verticals, like in the last presentation. Sports, fantastic vertical. So there are so many different kinds of sports and ways that you can work to engage with fan communities and people who love different kinds, because there are so many different kinds of sports, and sports transcends geography and language, etc. And so thinking about how we can help create wonderful fan engagement experiences, and this is another way that we can, of course, help to onboard Web 2 communities and non-native communities into Web 3. So sports is a great vector for us. Music is another one. I mean, all of these content silos, content verticals, are a great way where you can start to build communities around their shared passion for a particular kind of IP.
I mean, I totally agree with you. Obviously, as the organizer of this event, that's exactly the verticals that we're targeting. So, hopefully, we're on the same track there.
Yeah.
What are some of the obviously, there has been music, you know, Web3 and sports Web3, you know, activations. But what are some of the mistakes that you've seen that you think you know, they could improve upon? Because not all of them have been successful, right?
Sure. I think first, after having worked in licensed IP for a couple of decades now, I can tell you that cost of entry is very important, like all kinds of investments. So be careful if you're licensing a third party's IP not to pay too much, because then it's just sort of rent that hangs over your head and hangs on the business. So that can be very tough. I think I've seen a lot of successful projects, but they tend to be niche because they tend to find a particular community, and that community tends to be small by number, but large by revenue, because we have a very engaged audience in Web3. So I think most Web3 projects that you see these days that are successful tend to have very high engagement, very high retention, because these are, and these are the holy grail of people who make games.
Yeah.
You know, most game makers would kill for 10% retention, 30-day retention, right? And we can have casual games in Web3 with 60% 30-day retention. I mean, it's crazy. But the audiences themselves are smaller, right? A successful game in Web3 has hundreds of thousands of users, not hundreds of millions of users, because the ARPU, the average revenue per user, is vastly different, right? I would expect in a casual mobile title to be making pennies per month, you know, 5 cents, 6 cents per month per user. Whereas in Web3, you know, you make $10, $20, $100 per month. It's a completely different metric. So I think one of the things that's important is that we have to recalibrate what we mean by success and go back to some old-fashioned metrics like, you know, do I have good revenues, right? It doesn't matter if I don't have very many users if I have a lot of revenues, you know? People don't tell Ferrari they should be making 100 times as many cars because they sell them for a lot, right? It works for its own particular audience. So while our Web3 community at the moment is a relatively small percentage of the overall internet, it is a highly engaged one, and it spends a lot of money. So I think great businesses can be built.
I totally agree with you. I think going back to the gaming studios, obviously there's been quite a lot of uproar, I suppose, with the traditional gaming crowd with NFTs. Like even now, like, you know, you post that they're doing it, they're like, well, I'm not buying that game then. You see the comments, it's dribble. I suppose, like, behind closed doors, I suppose you talk to all the big gaming studios all the time, and that's not in public. What are they actually, like, do they really want Web3 activation, like NFTs and metaverse and what they're doing, and that they're too scared because of their audience to go out? Is that how it is, or is it different?
I think over the last couple of years, Web3 in traditional big game companies has been a little bit like talking about politics. Okay. Everybody has an opinion and it's very strong.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed is that all the big game companies have Web3 advocates and enthusiasts internally, but it takes time for them to win over their colleagues to get an entire enterprise behind taking the business in a new direction. So we've seen some of the big game companies go in early. I mean, Ubisoft, noteworthy in that respect. Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to do that because they risk alienating their existing audience. But I think what you'll notice is that if you pay close attention, most big game companies are now having Web3 initiatives. They're just not promoting and marketing them too much because the haters tend to be a very, very vocal but small minority on social media, and it just creates noise, and they don't like bad publicity. But it is a small minority. I think the key is for these game companies to figure out how embracing Web3 helps them to better engage their fans and their players. And so that part, I think, is something that requires a long education process because unfortunately, we don't have enough examples in our industry. And you have to remember that adopting new technology takes a long time for the entrenched incumbents. Yeah. So I joined gaming at the beginning of mobile about 12 years ago. And, you know, we all forget that Angry Birds launched 3 years after the App Store, right? So there were 3 years with no Angry Birds, and that's probably the first game most people remember on the iOS App Store. And then think about things like Formula One. The mobile version of Formula One came out 10 years after mobile launched, right? EA didn't want to have anything to do with mobile for Formula One because they said, well, nobody's going to look at this small screen. It's not a good experience. So it took a long time and the sort of brute force of a massive audience to bring these companies reluctantly into the space. But I do think that that creates a tremendous opportunity for people like, you know, the people in this audience who see the potential and the possibility because all of the biggest companies in mobile gaming are not the ones who were big on console, right? Companies like Rovio or Supercell or you name it, these are, you know, multi-billion-dollar businesses were all created because of this new platform. And it wasn't the ones from the previous platform that were successful. So I think that's actually a huge opportunity. So,
you know, speaking of opportunities, like obviously AI is on everyone's lips right now. Almost sometimes I feel forgotten about working in blockchain, but how do you see AI like integrating with gaming? Because I haven't even really thought about that. Like, so yeah.
Sure. So I think AI integrates with gaming through several, from what I've seen so far, you know, obviously we have some of our portfolio companies who are working feverishly on AI, and there are some great use cases. The simplest and most obvious for people like us who make games is generative art, because obviously internally the creation of art is a huge part of our expense and human resource when we make games. So if we can cut that cost through using AI to do rapid prototyping and to cut down the amount of time we have to spend on art, that's tremendous, because that means that more games will come out with lower budgets and be able to come out faster, and that's better for consumers. In terms of features for consumers, I can give you two cool examples. One, we have a company called Blockade Labs that creates basically 3D metaverse environments, so you can create a completely 360 3D rendered view based on a text prompt. And it's really cool. And it means that when you're thinking about creating metaverse content, you can ideate in actual photorealistic 3D now, just with a text prompt. And when you think about what that does for brainstorming, or you think about the implications that that has for now doing procedurally generated content with AI in 3D space, it's amazing. So, you know, AI, like generative art has been very good in 2 dimensions, but it's not there yet in 3D. But I think that's going to be massive in the next 18 months. And then the second thing I would say is if you think about text, so ChatGPT produces some amazing stuff, as we all know. The best example I've seen of it is we have a company called Clang Games that's making an MMO, and it's kind of a city builder world MMO. And so as you go through this world, the NPCs, the non-playing characters, use AI to generate dialogue between themselves, so that as you go through the world and go to work or go farming or go to the factory, etc., the random characters on the street don't just move around and bump into walls like they did when I was a kid. They have conversations, and they're all completely spontaneous and random, and you can stop and have a conversation with them or just eavesdrop on them. And that little change, that nuance, is amazing because from my perspective as a player, it makes me start to think of this interactive entertainment slightly differently. Because when you stop on the street and observe, somebody having a road rage incident or whatever, it becomes like reality TV and not so much what I think of as a game historically. So it starts to blur the lines between different kinds of entertainment. Sorry, that was a really long answer to your question.
It was good. It's fascinating. I'm sure our audience is really enjoying these insights. But obviously, I know you're the CEO of Animoca Brands, but you also head up the investment side of Animoca Brands as well. So obviously, I think last time I saw an article last week saying investment in Web3 is down 70% year on year, around that amount, which obviously makes a lot of startups, hungry for investment. How has your investment thesis changed? Because I know you guys were investing in a lot of things in 2021, and I'm sure you've slowed down just like everyone else.
Yep.
But yeah, can you give us an insight into your process of your investment thesis and how you spot these opportunities?
Sure. So I think our approach towards investing in Web3 the only thing that's changed because of market conditions is I think the same thing that happens to every other investor when the market turns, which is when it turns to favor investors, you get to be more choosy. So it just means that you can take more time, you can be much tougher on negotiation about price, and you can afford, because there's more supply in the market, to look at things that are a little bit more mature and a little bit more proven. And I think our investing strategy has started to reflect that. So where, back in 2020, we were looking at businesses where everybody was a first mover in the space, and it was about being fast to get that first mover advantage. Now, I can say to somebody, look, come back in 6 months when you've got 10,000 users in it, and then let's talk, because I can afford as an investor to wait until it's more mature because I'm not fighting with lots of other people for an investment.
Yeah. So at this point, what are we? We're in July this year. How many deals is Animoca Brands investing in per month right now?
This year? Good question. I actually don't know off the top of my head. I should. But I would have said
estimate.
I would have said somewhere between 20 to 25.
Okay.
Something, which is down quite a lot.
Yeah. Okay. But still, you're still active.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Well, because also a market like this has the most opportunity.
It's true.
As they say, flat is the new up, and now actually I think it's partially down is the new up round. So I think it's tremendous if you have your investing hat on.
So how do you, obviously Animoca has a massive ecosystem. It's actually crazy if you guys look it up. They've invested in so many amazing projects. How do you make sure that you're able to give each project, a certain level of service as a major investor?
So the short answer is we don't. We try, but we don't get, we can't be everything to everybody, although we do our best. I think we have, over the last 18 months, we've put in some great procedures. We have a team of portfolio managers that works with our portfolio companies. We try to run side events, alongside major conferences, just to get people together. And we do lots of stuff online. Obviously, it's a decentralized world and people are everywhere. So we'll do demo days so that other portfolio companies can learn, because obviously we have lots of service providers, for example, in our portfolio, or people building IP, companies that will benefit from making connections with other companies in the portfolio. So we try to lean into that and provide as many venues as we can for them to make those connections.
Okay, cool. So like, if anyone in the crowd is looking for investment right now and from Animoca Brands, like where do they go? What do they do?
So very simple, honestly, just reach out to us on socials or on our website. You know, the deal team is constantly looking at stuff. We try to look at everything. Obviously, we get a lot of stuff. And I would recommend, you know, a warm introduction is always better than a cold call, because it's much more likely that you're going to get time and attention from people.
Yeah. Okay. So I was reading something the other day about an interesting NFT project that Animoca Brands themselves did a drop on internally with the Mochaverse, right?
Yep.
And you're wearing it right there. So I found that quite interesting concept since you dropped
Yes.
it in your ecosystem. So maybe we could
Correct.
explain what that is and what's the concept behind that.
So I think the idea was really to create, so it's essentially, it started life as a PFP project, and what we did was we did a drop to everybody who is in the Animoca community. So by that, it means all our employees, all our portfolio companies, all our investors, anybody who holds NFTs of games and collections that we've made throughout the organization. So it's a really broad community, but it's basically anybody who has some kind of ownership-based, digital ownership-based touch point with our business, because we see that as our wider community. And so we wanted to find a way to represent that community membership, so we created this collection. And through this community, we want to try to harness the power of the community to get engaged for common purposes. So the first thing that we did was we allocated a large portion of ApeCoin, which is one of the fungible tokens that we hold on our balance sheet, to the Mochaverse community to vote. So that means that all the holders of Mochaverse tokens can vote our ApeCoin on the ApeCoin DAO, which is quite interesting because the ApeCoin DAO is obviously a very serious financial institution. You know, it's worth tens of billions of dollars. And it's a very mature DAO that has weekly votes on serious issues for the community. And it's a great way for people to learn about DAOs and community engagement in Web3. And so rather than just voting our tokens ourselves, we gave them over to our own community to vote, because that gives everybody a project to work on together and an activity, and hopefully gets them more engaged in some of the benefits of Web3, like being in a DAO.
So even though it was mainly dropped or provided to your partners in your ecosystem, others can buy it on the secondary market and get involved, right?
100%, because it shouldn't be an exclusionary community. Anybody should be able to become part of the community. That's what building an open community is about.
So I was just sticking on that topic of NFTs. Like we saw, obviously the massive PFP craze, and Yuga Labs have kind of pivoted towards this kind of open gaming metaverse that they built as the other side, I think they're building. How do you think that is like changing, like what the NFT space is going to be like for new and upcoming projects? Do you think the PFP phase is now completely done? Is that going to come back, or how do you see it?
I look at the PFP, so PFPs are not done, but I think the idea is that PFPs are like, you know, they're clubs, they're membership communities, and they're tokens of different communities, and we can all belong to multiple communities, but I think at the end of the day, the only thing that's finite is usually our time. And so the question is just how much time you have to spend on different communities, and people will tend to spend more of their time in, you know, the communities that they favor. So there's no reason, you know, I have lots of PFPs, but I spend more time in some communities than others. And I think most people will be the same. But PFPs were a great onboarding mechanism to help people understand what it means to have digital ownership of something. And now that we have, you know, millions of people who own PFPs of different types, we can then bring them one step further and start to engage them in governance, engage them in live events and gated access, engage them in in-game items and all the other things that can be enabled through NFTs, given that the PFP is kind of like the gateway drug, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, so I understand that like Animoca's headquartered, I think, in Hong Kong, and obviously we've seen a bit of draconian regulation in the US, but we've actually seen Hong Kong actually coming up quite a lot. So like,
Yes.
where do you see, I mean, obviously you've got a big international team, like where do you see the new hotspots the next few years for Web3?
Sure. I think from a regulatory standpoint, obviously, I have to, you know, big up Hong Kong, because after kind of a very quiet COVID period when Hong Kong kind of kept to itself, and that was quite negative, I think, for the business community for several years. We've now had a huge coming out party, and Hong Kong, from a regulatory standpoint, is really embracing Web3, which is fabulous because it is a historical financial center. So there, and we can't forget that lots of the early fintech crypto companies all came from Hong Kong. So there's a lot of core knowledge and understanding and community in Hong Kong. So I think that's great, and it's great for the ecosystem. I think what's happened in the US with the SEC is unfortunate, because I do think that it provides a little bit of a chilling effect for US-based businesses. We have some in our portfolio as well, where now they're thinking about how do we expand our business, and maybe we do that through overseas subsidiaries rather than through our US headquarters. And that's a shame for America. I mean, I'm American, I feel badly, right? But ultimately, we are a decentralized community and we are flexible, and so people will move to jurisdictions, I think, that favor the industry and welcome the industry. But I do think that a lot of the hotspots we've seen over the last couple of years will persist, and obviously we're in one of them here in Portugal.
Yeah, and hopefully you check out the Turkish market next month at Istanbul Blockchain Week as well. It's very,
Definitely.
very hot there. All right, look, we're coming into about 5 minutes or so left, so I wanted to open the floor. Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask Robby? If you do, you can just put up your hand. Can someone get a mic over here, please?
So I was looking at AnyChess, and I was wondering how the partnership with chess.com came about and how that's going to move forwards.
Sure. I wish I knew more about our chess project now that you've just asked me. I think the idea there is fundamentally how do we engage people in this very traditional gameplay style that everybody understands and is one of the most popular games in the world, but use these ownership and personalization mechanics, because one of the things about Web3 that's really great is that if you start to create competitive gaming environments, the leaderboards and the retention mechanisms and the competition mechanisms function really well on Web3 rails, and I think that's really the aim of AnyChess. And secondarily, it's also obviously to leverage well-known IP within the chess world. But a little bit like I was talking about sports earlier, I mean, chess is a sport, right, of sorts. And so this is a way for us to engage with this particular community of people who love chess around the world. And not all of them will be into Web3 or know anything about it, but maybe through AnyChess, we can bring them into Web3. So that's a big part of the goal.
Cool, thanks for your question. Anyone else have a question for Robby? Just show your hand and we'll get the microphone over to you. Chris?
Thanks for the great conversations. So obviously in Web3, community building is a very, very important thing, and there's many different aspects. Right now we're seeing a major trend in Twitter Spaces for community building, and having hosts and project leads kind of dox their voice at the very least behind some of these projects. What are some of the staples of community building for your portfolio and some things that you look for to grow out your ecosystem?
Sure. So I think in gaming traditionally, for the last 10, 15 years, we've had what we call live ops, which are ways in which community managers go on Discord or in other kinds of venues to engage with players directly. And I think that Web3 takes that to a whole different level, right? And so Twitter Spaces is a great tool, right? Discord is a great tool. Telegram groups are great. There's lots of different platforms, but I think the key part is actually is sticking with it and having the community in there engaged. It doesn't matter what the platform is. It's about the cadence of regularity and about the engagement level, and also about mixing it up. Not everybody wants to go on a Twitter Spaces every week, for example, but mixing it up with some live events, for example, or some webinars or other things, but constantly just thinking about how am I best going to help make those connections with my community. And coming to an event like this, a great way to meet up with other people and make those connections. So I think it's about the regularity, and it's about being thoughtful about what's really good for my community and what would they like. And that's actually more important than the specific platform.
All right, we might have time for one more question. Yep.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I am the founder of a Web3 gaming project, and we have like a lot of other people who have Web3 games as well in Lisbon. And yeah, I kind of wanted to ask a little bit more about how you see like marketing when it comes to different variations of different games. And you know, Twitter's very big with Web3, but I don't know if you've seen other games take off elsewhere and stuff like that.
Okay, so I guess first it depends on your distribution platform. So, you know, if you're a mobile game or if you're on Steam or something like that, then obviously you can take advantage of those platforms. As we all know, game advertising is kind of broken these days, and that's one of the things that makes it even more challenging. I think, especially in this kind of bear market environment, one of the things that I encourage all our studios to do is to lean into interoperability, which goes back to our first comment.
Yeah.
So I say to them, look, you have a great game, you have a fun IP you've created, but you know, what are you doing for Cool Cats? What are you doing for Bored Ape Yacht Club, etc.? And can you do collaborations with them? Can you do special things to engage those communities? Because the communities themselves are very engaged, and those kind of cross promotions will be viral within those communities, because if you're offering them a great experience or a benefit for coming and trying out what you're doing, then they will come.
All right, guys. Well, look, I think we're just about out of time, so I'm sure Robby would be happy to, you know, meet you guys and answer any questions you have at the side of the stage. But for now, our time's up. So have a great festival, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.